There's a specific kind of silence that happens when rain stops a championship. The crowd files out, the cameras power down, the stadium empties into wet concrete and folded umbrellas. And the player who's losing gets an entire night to sit alone with it. Eala had been here before. 4 times in her career, she had stood one single point away from a trophy. 1 point, 4 separate times. And 4 times she had watched it disappear. Now she was in Washington, D.C., on the other side of the world from the country she grew up in, down a set in the biggest final of her life. And the sky had just handed her an evening to think about every one of those 4 points again. What she did the next afternoon is the reason you're hearing her name. But to understand it, you have to go back in time, to a public court in the Philippines, and a man in his 60s who learned tennis out of books. She was born Alexandra Maniego Eala in 2005 in Quezon City in the Philippines, which is part of Metro Manila. Before the flags, before center court, before any of it, there was a little girl with chubby cheeks, ruffled socks, and shoes that lit up when she walked. She was 4 years old when she started playing tennis. Her older brother Miko was there too. Between them was their maternal grandfather, Roberto Maniego. She called him Lolo Bob. Lolo is the Filipino word for grandfather. He wasn't a famous coach. He wasn't building a champion. He was, by every honest description, a passionate club player, a man who loved sports and loved learning, and who decided that if he was going to teach his grandchildren tennis, he had better understand it properly first. So he read books about it. He watched matches. He studied the game like a subject. And then, afternoon after afternoon after school, he handed down what he'd learned to 2 kids on a public court. There was no ranking back then, no sponsor, no country to represent. There was a girl, her brother, their grandfather, and a tennis court. Years later, when Alex is asked about those days, she doesn't describe some tiny prodigy in the making. She remembers the socks, the light-up shoes, her own chubby cheeks, Miko beside her, and Lolo Bob taking them to practice. He taught her how to hit the ball, how to move, how to focus. And one more thing, which turned out to matter more than any of it, how to keep showing up. By every account, he was a tough-love kind of teacher. He expected effort. He expected discipline. And even when Alex was still small enough to need help with her shoelaces, he was already thinking about a future that didn't exist. Most of the courts available to them weren't the hard courts used in international competition. So he made sure she practiced on hard courts whenever he could arrange it. Think about that for a second. She was a child. There was no reason to believe she would ever leave the country to play tennis. No reason to believe anyone outside the family would learn her name. He wasn't preparing her because he knew. He was preparing her because he believed in her. And then, other people started believing in her too. In 2018, at just 12 years old, Alex won a prestigious junior tournament in France. The victory caught the attention of the Rafa Nadal Academy, which is a well-respected tennis academy in Spain. They reached out to her family and offered Alex a full scholarship to attend. This was a great honor and a big opportunity, but it meant that Alex would have to make a decision most 13-year-olds will never have to make. If she wanted to find out how far she could go, she would have to leave. Later that year, after turning 13, Alex packed her life into suitcases and moved from the Philippines to Mallorca, Spain, to begin a new chapter on her journey. 13. At 13, most kids are worried about school, friends, birthdays, and where they sit at lunch. Alex was moving to another continent, into another language, for a dream with no guarantee attached to any part of it. Not fame, not money, not a career, only potential, and a family willing to bet on it. This is the part success stories quietly delete. Once someone becomes famous, every decision behind them starts to look inevitable. Of course she went to Spain. Of course it worked. None of that was obvious at the time. She was just a kid getting on a plane. And getting better meant accepting distance. From home, from the Philippines, from the grandfather who started all of it. Her brother was training in tennis in Spain too, and her family stayed close. But underneath the training schedules and the fitness sessions and the schoolwork squeezed around practice, a trade was being made. Every step toward the future was time she would never get back. Because when we're young, we assume there will be more of it. More visits, more conversations, more chances to show the people who believed in us what we finally became. In November of 2019, Lolo Bob died. Alex was 14. She was thousands of miles into a journey the two of them had started together, and the man who put the first racket in her hands was gone. There's no graceful way to narrate that. It happens the way it eventually happens to everyone, except she was 14 and living in another hemisphere. And then, a few months later, something happened that's almost cruel in its timing. Alex flew to Australia and reached the junior girls doubles final at the Australian Open, one of the 4 biggest tournaments in the sport and one of the biggest stages a teenager can stand on. She and her partner won it. At 14 years old, Alex Eala was a junior Grand Slam champion, and the first place her mind went was to him. She dedicated her victory to Lolo Bob. She got emotional trying to explain that the two of them had dreamed about her winning a Grand Slam someday.
My dream is to become like Maria Sharapova and to win all 4 Grand Slams.
The thing they imagined together had actually happened, but he wasn't there to witness it. In the years since, she said her biggest moments keep sending her back to the same questions. What would he say? What would his reaction be? What would his face look like? Which is one of the more human things a person can admit. Because grief doesn't politely dissolve once your life gets better. Sometimes success makes an absence louder. Some people you want in the room so badly that the happiness arrives with an ache that never goes away. Alex kept going. In 2022, at 17, she won the Junior Singles Championship at the US Open in New York City, the first Filipina ever to win a junior Grand Slam singles title. Historic, yes, but also in practical terms, not enough. Because winning as a teenager doesn't automatically turn you into a star. It only qualifies you for the harder parts yet to come. For the next few years, Alex played the tournaments nobody televises. Small venues, small crowds, long flights between cities you wouldn't recognize. She won some, she lost plenty. She climbed slowly enough that most of the world had no idea she was climbing. This is the section that never makes the highlight reel. The famous moment arrives in an afternoon. The work behind it takes years, in rooms where nobody is clapping. And then, in March of 2025, the whole thing accelerated at once. She arrived at the Miami Open ranked number 140 in the world, which is to say, the sport officially considered 139 women better than her. She wasn't on the poster. She wasn't the story. But then, she beat a Grand Slam champion. Then she beat the reigning Australian Open champion. And then she beat a former world number 1, who was one of the defining players of her generation. That run pushed Alex into the world's top 100, the first player representing the Philippines ever to get there. From that point on, a pattern started following her around. Every new milestone arrived attached to the same phrase: the first Filipina, the first player from the Philippines, the first person representing her country to stand where she was standing. She wasn't only building a career anymore, she was walking into rooms no Filipino tennis player had ever been inside. But it didn't go straight up from there. It almost never does. The Women's Tennis Association, or WTA, is the governing body behind women's professional tennis. They manage the WTA Tour at venues around the world. A few months after Miami, Alex reached her first WTA Tour final in Eastbourne, England, her first real chance at a WTA title. And she got close, closer than most players ever get. She reached championship point, 1 point from the trophy. She lost it. She reached championship point again. Lost it. Again. Lost it. A fourth time. 1 point away, 4 separate times in a single afternoon. And then she lost the match. If you don't follow sports, this might be the easiest moment in her entire story to understand. Almost everyone knows the feeling of getting close enough to touch something and watching it evaporate anyway. The job, the relationship, the offer that was basically yours, the thing that was certain right up until it wasn't. After the match, Alex stood on that court and watched someone else lift the trophy. And then she had to start over. Maybe that's where a grandfather's lessons actually get spent. Not on the good days. Anyone can be disciplined on the good days. The morning after it hurts. That's the real test. You still need to show up. So she showed up. By the summer of 2026, she arrived at Wimbledon as a different player. Wimbledon is one of those events even people who don't watch sports have heard of. All white clothing, grass courts, royalty in the stands, more than a century of history behind it. And at the middle of it sits center court, one of the most famous stages in all of sports. Waiting for her there was the defending Wimbledon champion. Alex beat her. On center court, in front of a stunned crowd. Afterward, when she tried to explain what it meant, her mind didn't go forward to whatever came next. It went backward. To the chubby cheeks, the ruffled socks, the shoes that lit up, her brother, and Lolo Bob taking them to practice on a court in the Philippines. She was standing on the most famous tennis court on earth, thinking about where the whole thing started. Maybe that's part of why people are getting attached to her. She doesn't perform like someone auditioning for stardom. She laughs easily. She gets emotional. She talks about her family constantly. Away from tennis, she likes music, comedy and horror movies, ice cream, rice, and milk tea, which is possibly the most 21-year-old list ever assembled. Because that's what she is. A young woman doing something extraordinary, who is also still somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, and somebody's granddaughter. Filipino fans have noticed, even those who don't know anything about tennis. They follow her from tournament to tournament. They bring flags. They chant her name in stadiums where, for most of tennis history, there was no particular reason for a Filipino flag to be. To them, it's not about tennis. It's about something bigger. And Alex has started talking about what comes after her. More courts back home, more access, more chances for kids to find the game. Because somewhere in the Philippines right now, there's a little girl watching her and quietly recalculating what's possible. Which brings us back to the rain. By the time Alex arrived in Washington, D.C. in mid-summer 2026 for the D.C. Open, she had done nearly everything except the one thing that counts as a rival: win a title on the main WTA Tour. The tournament was stacked against her, but she was up to the challenge. She beat the reigning Olympic singles champion. She beat a former U.S. Open finalist. She beat a former world number 3. And then she faced a 4-time Grand Slam champion. Alex beat her too. One by one, the famous names came off the board. And in the final, waiting for her, was one of the best players in the world, an American who was the number 1 seed in the entire tournament. Sunday, August 2nd, 2026. Alex lost the first set. In women's professional tennis, if you lose 2 sets, you lose the entire match. For Alex, the trophy started sliding away again, and that uncomfortable feeling in the pit of her stomach returned. But then, the rain came. They cleared the court. The match was suspended until the next day, and Alex went back to her hotel with an entire night to spend inside her own head. 1 set down, with 4 championship points from Eastbourne still sitting somewhere in her memory. You could write the sad version of this story from right here. Plenty of athletes have. Monday, August 3rd, 2026. Alex came back the next afternoon and won the second set. And then, in the deciding third set, she absolutely demolished her opponent. She had done it. Alex Eala was now a WTA Tour champion, the first player representing the Philippines ever to win one. Think about who was standing on that court. The 4-year-old with the light-up shoes, the 13-year-old with the suitcases, the 14-year-old who lost her grandfather in another hemisphere, the teenager grinding through tournaments nobody televised, the young woman who had been 1 point away 4 times and lost. All of them in the same body, holding the trophy. And around her, Filipino flags, held by people who had traveled to be there. Strangers who now cared about a dream that used to belong to one family on a public court. That's the strange arithmetic of becoming known. For years, the dream is private. Then one day, other people start carrying it with you. Here's what makes this different from most inspirational stories you'll hear. There was barely time to celebrate. The next day, she was in Toronto for the Canadian Open, because professional tennis doesn't pause for anyone's best moment. And at the end of August comes New York City, the US Open, the same tournament where a 17-year-old won a junior title and then went home. She's returning as somebody else entirely, a tour champion, a top player, someone who has beaten Grand Slam champions and won on center court, someone with actual evidence that she belongs. That doesn't mean she's going to win it. The sports world doesn't hand out endings that clean. She might make a spectacular run. She might lose in the first round. Something wonderful could happen. Or something devastating. Nobody knows, including her. And personally, that's why I think that this moment is the exact right time to begin paying attention. Because normally, when a story like this reaches us, it's already finished. We already know the ending. The trophies are already on the shelf. Somebody has already decided which struggles mattered. But with Alex, we've arrived somewhere in the middle. Or maybe closer to the beginning of her story. So we have the rare privilege to witness her extraordinary journey unfold in real time. So, who is Alex Eala? She's 21. She's from the Philippines. She's one of the best tennis players in the world. None of which is really the answer. She's a granddaughter carrying something forward. A little girl whose grandfather believed in her before anyone had a reason to. A 13-year-old who left home. A 14-year-old who lost him. A teenager who kept practicing when nobody was watching. A young woman who got painfully close, lost, and came back anyway. Lolo Bob never saw center court. He never saw the crowd in Washington, D.C. He never saw Filipino flags going up in stadiums around the world because of his granddaughter. But he didn't need to see the ending to build it. He read the books. He watched the matches. He took his grandkids to a court in the afternoons. And somewhere in all those ordinary afternoons, he put something inside her that outlived him. So when Alex walks onto a court in New York City later this month, remember where it started. Not with a famous coach, not with a trophy, not with the spectacle of center court. With a grandfather, with a little girl, with a tennis racket, and with a pair of shoes that lit up when she walked.